Next, and you hit on this on your list, is visuals. Using too many of them, having too much information on there, and just wearing them out with information. I hear people all the time talk about, I'm going to go give a PowerPoint presentation to this potential client. I mean, just by calling it that, I'm going to give a PowerPoint presentation. Who do you think is the star of the show when you say, I'm going to give a PowerPoint presentation? The PowerPoint. Today, people do not want to see 17 slides in 1 minute. There's a revolt against PowerPoint, and we teach that a lot in our classes about do not rely on PowerPoint to be the presentation. You are the presentation. You want people focusing on you and then occasionally focusing on a visual. The other thing that can happen on that that I want to cover is that Guy Kawasaki has the idea of the 10-20-30 rule. And under Guy Kawasaki's 10-20-30 rule, you have 10 slides for every 20 minutes, and the pitch has to be a minimum of 30 pitch. 10 slides, 20 minutes, 30 pitch. The 30 pitch forces you to not have 3 paragraphs on a PowerPoint presentation. If you have paragraphs on a PowerPoint presentation, you have too much information. You never want to find yourself saying to your audience, I know you can't read that from where you're sitting, but here's what it says. If you find yourself ever desiring to say, I know this is too much information and you can't read that, you need to take that off and not have anything there. If there's something that you want them to read, you might say, if you'll look down on the handout that I gave you, you'll see that this is there for you to review. A couple months ago, I gave a presentation, and a person went on before me. He happened to be very high position within a company, and he said, I'm going to go on first. He said, I've only got 15 minutes. Would you put on my presentation? And I loaded up his 15-minute presentation, and he had 47 slides to show in 15 minutes. At the end of that presentation, people were so dizzy about what he was trying to talk about that they had no idea what he was talking about. I mean, he was giving what in essence would have been a 2-hour presentation in 15 minutes. And of course, it wasn't a very effective one. Next on here is reading a speech or a slide. Most people early on when they're going to give a presentation, they read their slide, they read their presentation, and that's a very natural thing to do, is to read your presentation. But what we find is whenever we look down and not look at our audience, there's a disconnect that happens with people automatically when we start reading something. The other thing that can happen to you is, as you can imagine, you lose your place in your speech, and then all of a sudden if you've lost your place, that quietness until you find your place can be deafening to people. You'll see people also read a slide, and y'all talk about that today. Today I want to talk about reading slides or a speech. You see how when you turn around and look at a slide, we don't need to turn around and look at that. We have, in the presentation, you'll always have your teleprompter. You want to avoid reading wherever possible. Number 9 is the use of the ums and so's and you knows, and there's 2 things here going on. Ums and so's are filler words, and we use filler words when we're trying to let our mind catch up with our mouth. And that causes us then to say, and so, and you know, because what we're doing is we're letting our mind catch up. Instead of filling it up with ums and you knows and all those kinds of things, what you want to do is just stop. The second thing on there is the throw-in words. The throw-in words are those things like you know, don't you know. That will wear out an audience if you keep saying things like you know it there. Once again, it's just stopping. Don't use those words. The third thing on that, which I would call in this, would be, I remember I had a sales manager when I first graduated from college. When he got excited, he had a form of a tick, and we talk about ticks would be things like that you might do. And the other thing that he did, he would get a piece of spit that would be in his mouth. You might have seen people do this. This is not the most pleasant thing in the world, but the more they talk, their mouth gets dry, and then all of a sudden he had this piece of spit. And so he'd be training us on something, and the only thing I can remember doing was looking at his mouth and going, does he realize he's got a piece of spit in the front of his mouth? And so we used to joke about it. Now, it's not funny at all. And the reason we have a public speaking program is to help us with something like if we had spit. If you're in sales and you had a tendency to have something like that go on in your mouth, that would be extremely distracting. So you want to make sure you avoid the filler words, the buts and the ands, and then also ticks. The last point on this when giving a presentation, when I'm working with somebody, I'm seeing a weak opening oftentimes, and then finally, and most importantly, is either no call to action or a weak call to action. Deborah Boswell, who's worked with us, one of the things that she's talked about, the two most critical parts of a presentation are the opening and the beginning. So that opening is where you try to capture somebody's opinion, capture their attention. And then at the end, that's where you want to have that strong call to action. I've worked with so many people that at the end of the presentation, they'll say, do you have any questions today? Okay, well, we appreciate the opportunity to be here with you. If you have any questions, we'll be following up with you in the future. You do not want to end it that way. You want to end with, where do you see that our next one or two steps that we need to do? That's having a call to action. What are you, if you want to ask them to buy, are you ready to make a decision today? Now, those might feel kind of salesy, but if somebody's there to listen to a presentation, the thing that you want to do, besides educate them on that, is to make sure that presentation, that they're moving the business forward. So have that strong call to action. Earlier when I talked about having the goals at the beginning of the presentation and then reviewing those goals at the end of the presentation, the logical thing says, you said that these were the most important things at the beginning of today. How would you rate that? Yes, we've done that. Yes, we've done that. Yes, we've done that. And yes, we've done that. Well, since we've met all your needs, does it seem appropriate that we would move forward at this point? If they say no, then you get a chance to understand why are they not ready. And it might be appropriate that it's not time. The important thing is to make sure you have a strong call to action. Okay. So let's summarize it if we can. There's two things as you think about giving an effective presentation that I want you to focus on. The first one is the 4 Ps, and the 4 Ps involves both of those. That's that planning, preparing, practicing, and then finally presenting. If you think about the 4 Ps, the 3 of the Ps happen actually before you give a presentation. Secondly, I'd like to leave you with is that people are giving lots and lots of PowerPoint presentations. If you're going to give a presentation, give a presentation that might involve something like PowerPoint, but that is not dependent on that being your presentation. There's a great book that talks about death of a presentation, and it talks about how PowerPoint is ruining people's presentations. PowerPoint is not a report. It's a summary of what you want to achieve. And then finally, that was not in the top 10, but that I would tell you, especially in a selling environment, the last thing to do would be to have some fun. Most of us are not presenting something that's life and death. And there's a great book that says all business is show business. And I believe that to be true, that when you're giving a presentation, one of the things people want is they want to be entertained. They want to be informed. Now, I don't mean entertained like, ha-ha, let me tell you the joke about Bob and Sue or the minister and the rabbi that got together. Not that kind of entertainment. But they want you to be light. They want to learn something, but they also want to make that experience enjoyable. So I'd ask that you incorporate these 2 basic concepts as you think about the top 10 mistakes and make sure that you don't do those.